Welcome back to Waking Mad, the Consciousness Project. I'm Ben Bruce, and I have the great opportunity to talk to a researcher in consciousness, Alex Defoe. And he has recently completed a PhD from Monash University studying veridical out-of-body experience phenomena. And so we're here to talk to him about his research, about what brought him to this field, because obviously an academic pursuit of this field is very difficult to do, and Alex will talk to you about that in a minute. And also he's written a book that's a lot more practical, and it sounds to be creative as well. So on the subject, so welcome Alex.
Thank you so much for having me here.
Oh, it's a great pleasure, and thank you for coming. So probably best if you just start out by telling us about your research work, just to start with that.
Sure.
And what exactly have you researched, and what brought you into that and interested you doing that?
Sure. So I'll talk a bit about my main focus, which is out-of-body experiences. So I suppose my interest was sparked through personal experiences of reading up on OBs, trying to induce them using various techniques, various approaches, visualization, meditation, and having had some of those experiences myself led me to be even more curious about looking deeper into the nature of consciousness and what they mean for us.
So you were having out-of-body experiences yourself?
I was having partial OBs. I wouldn't say I had quite as impressive accounts as some of the ones I've read about, but they certainly triggered me to want to look more into it. So I had experiences where like part of my arm would separate. I felt like I had two arms, for instance, and experiences like that, which really led me to question, is consciousness contained in the body, or can it actually expand beyond the body?
The great materialist reductionist view. Is consciousness an epiphenomena of the brain? Or is there something else going on? Is it non-local? Which is really what out-of-body experience is, isn't it? It's non-local consciousness existing outside the body.
Yes, I think that's the fascinating thing about OBs, is that they really get to the heart of the dualism question that you mentioned. Is it the physical materialist view that we take, that consciousness is somehow produced by the brain, or is the brain rather a receiver or modulator of consciousness? That's what really sparked my interest based on some of those personal experiences. And I wanted to really do research, not to just follow a belief system which says that yes, consciousness does exist or it doesn't exist, but rather figure it out myself. So I started reviewing the research, reading some of the literature, and that's how I was led into doing a PhD and actually studying some of this more formally.
So how did you actually enter into the PhD at the university? Did you just rock up at the university and say, hey guys, I want to study OBE phenomena a bit more technically? Who wants to do it? How did you sort of get into that? I'm being facetious, but how does one study such a phenomena in a mainstream university environment?
Yeah, it's a great question. I haven't actually been asked that before.
Really?
It was a bit of a synchronicity actually that it happened. I didn't know that I would end up doing a PhD or not. I was deciding whether I want to go into clinical practice. I knew I wanted to do psychology, but I was deciding between counselling or research, and I wasn't quite sure which direction I'd go into. I was friends with Lance Storm, who's actually heads up the Australian Institute of Parapsychological Research. So parapsychology is the area of science concerned with looking at psi phenomena, anomalous phenomena like out-of-body experience, telepathy, precognition, and those sorts of states.
Lance Storm.
Dr. Lance Storm, yes.
Yeah, okay.
And
I'm really proud to hear that we have such an institute in Australia.
Yes, it's a small one. I mean, it's not a major research body, but it is good that there are people doing legitimate research in the area.
Because on that note, I know that parapsychology used to be a field or a unit that was offered in most universities mainstream. And then around the late 70s, early 80s, a lot of universities just started dropping it from the courses available. I know I went to University of Western Australia, and I came across these old courses. Parapsychology and phenomenology was available, but obviously when I went there, that was long gone. There's no such thing such as, they were very, very mainstream, and I heard it was something to do with the science of psychology wanting to be taken seriously, or wanting it to be a serious science, and because it's so subjective, it's obviously very difficult for that to happen.
That's right.
And so, obviously they wanted to be very, very conservative, and a lot of these parapsychology things were looked a bit too doo-doo-doo, so they were put to the side. But institutes still exist, don't they?
Definitely, and I mean the psychology, the accreditation council is very regulated in this country, so they'll be very strict with what can and can't be taught. So,
and accreditation is everything, isn't it?
Yes, everything has to be certified, and anything that's a bit out there gets cut straight away. But I was talking to Lance Storm, who is at the University of Adelaide, where they study parapsychology. It's one of the few places remaining where the research is still supported. And I asked him, I said to him, I want to do something a bit more formal to pursue this study. Where do you recommend I start? Like, would you consider supervising me? He said he can't supervise him because he's in Adelaide, but he suggested a few places in Melbourne. So he suggested Deakin, that at the time actually had a anomalistic laboratory within Deakin University, and Monash Uni, which had a small, they actually offered an elective unit in parapsychology at Monash at the time. So first of all, I contacted Deakin, only to find out that they had recently removed that area of study.
I was going, oh my god, there's more. More universities do this. Oh, no, sorry.
It's slowly reducing.
Too slow.
I contacted Monash next, and they were interested in supporting the research I wanted to do, which was great to hear. So that's how I got into the area. I contacted a couple of people at Monash that said they would definitely supervise the research. They actually offered me some teaching work, teaching parapsychology within the departments. Of course, their condition was that I would be a bit more skeptical and balanced towards the field of study, but at the time it was still offered as a unit. It's not anymore, of course, but...
Monash dropped it too?
Yes, the parapsychology elective unfortunately was dropped as well.
Exactly.
But at the time, they were quite supportive, and...
Sounds like you got in just in time, nick of time.
I suppose so, yes. But having said that, my research was based quite heavily in neuroscience and cognitive theory of out-of-body experience, with a small aspect looking at the parapsychology of it, simply because it was in a mainstream university setting, and that is the academic climate. Most of the theories we have of the OBE that are popular or legitimate, considered legitimate within academia, don't look at the veridical aspects or the extrasensory perception aspects of OBEs.
So veridical out-of-body experience research, you were saying veridical means verifiable.
Yes.
Is that right?
So experiences that seem to include some extrasensory perception, where a person's consciousness allegedly travelled somewhere else and apparently received some information, or a person might see something floating up above their bed, and then they come back down, and they might say that there was like an object on the roof of the house. They walk outside and they see that same object.
So the person has this subjective experience, and there is some objective way to verify that. Like they see something from a perspective they wouldn't be able to see had they not been there.
Yes.
Yep.
So we're talking about realistic out-of-body experiences that seem to correspond to physical reality, rather than imaginary out-of-body experiences where a person might claim that they went off to like an imaginary world or to this heavenly or hellish place.
So an out-of-body experience where you're basically like a ghost in this physical dimension, sort of floating around, just a ball of energy or something like that, rather than say a lucid dream or an inner experience or a dream state is
exactly
the basic difference.
Yes, a more realistic sort of experience. Yeah.
Okay, excellent. So this is very educational for me as well, so thank you. So I'm gathering that when a lot of skeptics, now I think open-minded skepticism is a very good paradoxical paradigm, the best of both worlds. Be skeptical, question everything, don't say you know something when you don't, but still be entertaining theory, and still be happy to debate and theorise and postulate. You have ideas, basically. Don't let it hold you back. In other words, open-minded skepticism. Now, what you often get from ultra skeptics, like Randy and those sorts of people, and Richard Dawkins and these sorts of people, the late Christopher Hitchens and whatnot. The skeptic sort of cabal is this is all nonsense. Existence, consciousness beyond the body as an out-of-body experience, because there's no evidence for it. And yet, what you've just found as a consumer of education, and then you become the teacher and the expert, is you can't even access that field. They shut down the programs. You were saying one after the other, like a domino effect, they were shutting them down. And then even in a sense you could say, vestigial universities that had the parapsychology, electives or what have you, they then constrained the way you measured it or the way that you researched it.
That's right.
Is that right?
Yeah, look, it's a very polarized sort of field. As you mentioned, you'll hear the skeptics say that there are no veridical aspects, that the out-of-body experience is either an illusion or a hallucination. Then you'll hear parapsychologists on the other extreme, not all parapsychologists, but some, will say that the soul leaves the body, or the consciousness definitely leaves the body. And it's a very polarized debate. So you'll have this minority arguing these radical ideas, and then the majority also arguing a very radical position, in my view, this radical position of skepticism, that we shouldn't even consider the veridical aspects. And
it's almost like dogma.
Well, it's a particular theory, I suppose, and we attach to that theory, and we say this is the theory of the brain, the neuroscience of OBEs, that they occur as a result of lack of blood supply to a particular part of the brain, for instance.
Or an injury,
Whereas parapsychologists might argue that there's a different theory, whereas what I was interested in looking at is a more balanced approach, so considering both and seeing, okay, maybe there's some truth here and some truth here, and evaluating that. But as you mentioned, that can be a bit difficult, because in order to do that, you have to review the parapsychological literature. And I suppose the argument I've had from fellow academics when talking about some of that literature is, it's not published in high-impact journals, it was published too long ago, the sample sizes were too small, all of these arguments that they'll use as a sweeping generalization to not even look at the literature. So they'll say, it's not good quality research, therefore I'm not going to look at it.
But I don't know about you, but I can really see the belief system is driving that argument. It's not necessarily...
Skepticism.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's not necessarily open at all to the field or to study.
Yes. Yeah, well,
very closed-minded.
It's part of the problem. I mean, when you go through the psychology study sequence, you learn about particular theories and not others. So they've been trained to look at the mind and look at the brain through a particular lens, not necessarily considering alternative explanations. So of course, if you've been trained for 5 or 6 years to look at the world through that lens, and someone introduces this seemingly radical suggestion that maybe consciousness exists beyond the body, of course they're going to defend that view, that how could this be the case?
And of course we could say, well, how could this not be the case? Okay, so what did you study exactly, and what did you find in your PhD research?
Well, a lot of the research I did looked at the cognitive and neuroscience theories of the out-of-body experience. I was particularly interested in looking at what causes the experience, what actually happens in the brain, and also on a cognitive level. I suppose my personal interest was, why people have a high incidence of out-of-body experiences. So some people have only one experience in their entire life and then nothing else, even though it might be a very profound, like out-of-body or near-death state. But then there are others that seem to make up a proportion of the sample where they'll have dozens of experiences throughout the year, and this will be ongoing throughout their entire life. So I was interested in, what actually happens at the neurological and cognitive level that causes these individuals to seem to be able to induce multiple OBEs consistently. So one of the main findings that my research determined is that age seems to have a strong correlation to one's sense of being in a body. So we all have a sense of, I'm in my body right now, and this is my own subjective self. Individuals who suffer with schizophrenia or other mental disorder where they might confuse the body boundaries actually have a more fluid sense. So they might look at your arm and think that it's actually their arm. There's a confusion there, sensory boundary confusion. So I was interested in looking at why is that the case? Why do we have this strong subjective sense that this is my body, while certain populations, certain samples seem not to have that delineation between the body boundary?
I believe there was a book written by Oliver Sacks, the famous neurologist, on this matter, and it was a wonderful book that he wrote, and it was called "The Man Who Mistook His Wife for a Hat."
Yes. Yes,
Wonderful title.
It's quite peculiar, some of the cases in psychosis and schizophrenia, where sometimes a person will think that like their own arm is not their arm and it's actually trying to attack them or something like that. So they'll discount particular limbs. And I thought that looking into that area could give us some clues into the out-of-body experience.
Yes.
The person, they dissociate from their own body and might associate with either a secondary body, or they might kind of expand outward into this spiritual oneness experience away from the body. And I was interested in what is it that actually dislodges that sense of subjective embodiment. Mm-hmm. So the main finding that I came to, based through analysing several samples, participants, was that age was a big factor. So as we get older, we seem to have a stronger body boundary. Children and those who are younger seem to have a more fluid body sense. So of course there are a few developing theories on why that's the case.
So children and younger people have a more fluid body parameter sense.
That's what the data seems to suggest.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. And the other thing you mentioned was considering OBE as sort of like a dissociation thing going on, and consciousness from body.
Yes.
Let's have a look at some of these pathology states like schizophrenia, where the patient will have a dissociated limb, for example.
That's right, yes.
Okay,
so that's where I started looking at the pathologies, but then I also asked, is there some correlation with normal, people that don't have any kind of mental pathology? And age was the common factor I found. So,
I mean, ostensibly, I don't want to jump ahead here at all, but I would just be thinking that children are far more open-minded.
Yes. The other theory is that they're still developing the concept of the body. So some theorists argue that we're not necessarily born with that subjective sense that this body is mine. Like if we look at the brain, we can't isolate one part of the brain that regulates body awareness, that says, yes, this is your body.
Interestingly,
we develop
traditional indigenous peoples around the world who have less of an individualistic culture probably don't necessarily develop that Western concept of my body or whatever to the same extent. Just like, I know a lot of Aboriginal peoples couldn't relate to the concept of owning land because the land owned you and you were a custodian of the land. And of course, as you know, tribal psychology, if you will, is far more a collective identity.
Yes.
And so I'm wondering if, it's also a cultural vestige.
Well, out-of-body experiences occur across all cultures, as far as we know, but in terms of the association we have with the body as being my body, I'm not sure. I don't think too much research has actually been done across cultures, which would be an interesting area to look at. But I found age was the big thing.
Okay.
So what we've found is that 30% of out-of-body experiences are actually, sorry, I'll rephrase that, people who are in university or late adolescence will have about 30% of out-of-body experiences. Then that number seems to drop in samples at an older age.
So 30% of people in college or what have you have out-of-body experiences?
Yes, which is actually, it's rather high. When I tell people that it's rather high, they say, it's not that high, it's only 1/3. But considering that it is such a transformative experience a lot of the time.
Was that research coming out of the University of Waterloo or something?
That was done by Harvey Irwin.
Irwin, okay.
I think it might have been based in Australia, but I'm not sure which.
Okay. I remember reading some papers on this years ago, and I know that when I was in university, so I was about 18, I think, and I went to college, so I was living in the halls of residence and all that, and I'd had out-of-body experience phenomena prior to that, but it was at that age, at university, that I had my first major out-of-body experience with all the phenomena that you can possibly imagine. During the day, I just come back from a cross-country run. I fell on my bed, collapsed basically, and then bang, instantly was, woke up paralysed, and then went into a situation where I was flying through the university, And I remember going up to this fire hydrant, a red fire hydrant, but it was the size of a double-decker London bus. I was an infinitesimal point of consciousness. And then, I had synesthesia as well.
Mm-hmm.
And luckily I was studying some of these things, so I had a language to grapple with it. I think that helps a lot.
Definitely.
Flying over the ocean and an island, and then it's like my vision was tasting and touching the granite rock. So it was like a synesthesia between vision and olfaction and touch and texture through the tongue. It was a really interesting synesthesia. And going up to students and looking in the eye, and then they were like freaked out or something like that. And then I came back to the body and experienced all of this additional phenomena. I saw what you would call the writing on the wall, written in some other language in like red blood ink. I could hear the scratching of the quill on the wall. I was paralysed in my body. I kept having multiple streams of consciousness occurring, and I think I was flittering between them. And I saw the writing on the wall, and it was a different language, an ancient language, but I could understand it in that state. And then I saw this head manifest in front of me, which kept spinning around and revealing a different face, quite a grotesque face. And then I heard people talking about me as if it was, probably what a person with schizophrenia would hear, an auditory hallucination. But there was probably about 4 or 5 people saying rather paranoid things like, oh, he's really done it now, or he's gone too far, and things like that. And then as I was paralysed, I remember, if you wiggle your little toe, you can break the paralysis. And it's like a spreading activation throughout the rest of the body. So I did that, and I came out of it, and I was into complete banal waking consciousness, if you will. But I had a complete rendering of that entire experience. And I don't know, exactly how to say this, but you just know that wasn't a dream. It was far too filled with phenomena and God knows what, and it doesn't have the same subjective quality of a dream.
Yes, it sounds very profound.
It was profound. But sorry, I kind of hijacked your description there of your research.
That's all right. Well, I guess going back to experiences in university and college, they seem to be higher in incidence than in the regular population. So if we look at the statistics, they seem to show about 10% of people have OBEs, but then that number is quite a bit higher around that age range. And it would be interesting to look at children as well, because I suspect children have a lot of these experiences too.
Interesting. And I gather it's also because if you're a young teenage person, teen angst and the hormones and becoming an adult and your body growing and all the awkwardness and staying up late and caffeine and alcohol and drugs and all that sort of thing that you might,
yes.
that could have an impact on consciousness to some degree.
Yes, I think so, definitely, yes.
And now, so the ultimate meta-analysis that you did was about the age relationship with OBE and when people have it, right?
I looked at a lot of different variables.
Okay.
So I looked at fantasy proneness, which is like daydreaming, or people that might have what we call mild hallucinations. So they're not significant enough to be diagnosed as some kind of mental disorder, but they might hear their name off in the distance when no one actually said it. So I looked at fantasy proneness, daydreaming, religious affiliation, a whole bunch of other variables. And interestingly, the only one that was actually a strong predictor was age. So that's
the only strong predictor of out-of-body experience frequency is age.
The sense of body fluidity was age, yes, which also confirms the out-of-body research that was done by Harvey Irvin, which suggests that age is a strong indicator of having OBEs earlier on in life. And
so, obviously, we were just saying before we started the interview, Alex, you were limited in what you could do through mainstream academia because of what we were talking about, the skeptical paradigm. And so you wrote a book which is a bit more creative and practical and so on.
Yes.
Would you like to introduce your book?
Sure. The book, Hearts in Transcendence.
So this is the book, Alex Defoe's book, Hearts in Transcendence. And the subtitle?
Human Consciousness Liberated. So
the man's written a book, and he's done a PhD, so he's got some expertise here, that's for sure. So what's this book about?
So this book, I was actually writing throughout my PhD. It was almost like a kind of a balancing for me mentally, because I was doing really rigorous research and engaging the left brain, using this very analytical
You're becoming a
approach.
computer algorithm.
Yes, and doing a lot of statistics, and I was actually starting to really go out of my mind doing this very linear.
An out-of-body mental experience.
Yes. So I actually started creatively writing and just putting things down on paper, some of my own experiences, and eventually that led to this book, I suppose. So the book has 200 reflections or techniques, if you like, with exploring consciousness.
Okay.
So the premise is that we can engage with our consciousness practically. So whenever we throw around the word consciousness in a scientific podium, it creates controversy because we don't really know what consciousness is.
Good point.
So,
Good point, rather.
so this was an opportunity for me to say what I think consciousness is, I suppose without that academic restriction, of trying to put it into academic language at least.
And otherwise, its method to enhance your consciousness,
Yes.
to liberate it.
So basically I start off with the premise that let's answer the question of what consciousness is, not by thinking about the question, but by engaging with the consciousness itself. So let's reflect on what does it mean to be conscious? What does it mean to be me? So I ask the reader to start, that's the starting point of the book, to go into this meditation, if you like, and to look at, there's this thinking mind of me, but there's also a consciousness. There's something else. It's not thinking, it's just experiencing. And
Almost like that, in meditation, that point of awareness, the observer.
yes,
But it's not thinking.
that's right.
Almost as if, this is what I felt at least, or experienced, is that the mind is more of a tool. Like, a carpenter will have a hammer and be building a house, but he's not the hammer.
Exactly.
Yes. And I find we often confuse the human being, really, or the human consciousness with the mind, which is more of a tool.
Yeah, exactly, and that's pretty much what the whole first chapter is about, that we tend to believe that we think. We have these conceptions of who we are, and we tend to believe those conceptions about who we think we are, but the true self is not actually those conceptions, it's beyond that, it's the consciousness.
Which therefore would be, I suppose, identity scripts,
Yes.
or self-schema, or auto-cognitions. I mean, these would be quite limiting of your potential, wouldn't they?
Exactly, and that's really what the book is about, is liberating human potential.
So wars are based on this thing, aren't they?
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, I'm a Russian, or I'm an English, or I'm American, or I'm a jihadist, or you know what I mean. And so that's an aspect of identity. And I should imagine that if everyone realised that they were consciousness, we probably wouldn't have any murder.
That's right.
You'd be killing yourself, wouldn't you?
Yeah. So, but I think that's also, I guess there is an oversimplification in that, in saying that we're all just consciousness, which is also a point that I address in the book. It's quite thorough as a book. It goes quite deep into altered states of consciousness. So rather than just finishing...
Well, many things, aren't we?
Yes.
Yeah.
Rather than just saying you are consciousness. I really feel like this progression in mental health that's happened from a purely cognitive behavioral model to looking at more mindfulness-based approaches. It hasn't gone all the way. I feel it could go a lot further, and I suppose this is what this book is unraveling as well.
Okay.
So people will kind of stop there with a mindfulness class. They'll look at the consciousness and the thinking mind and distinguish between the two. Whereas in this book, I ask them to go further and to think about what would it be like to live from consciousness, for instance, rather than the conceptions, and unpack that a bit deeper.
So this wonderful book, Hearts and Transcendence, Human Consciousness Liberated by Alex Defoe, where can people find this?
It's on major online bookstores, so Amazon.com.
Yep.
All the major sites. Some bookshops have it as well, but probably Amazon is the easiest way to get
Okay,
it.
so you can purchase it online, and it looks like it's going to be a wonderful read with lots of helpful suggestions for liberating consciousness, and by God, we need that, I think, in this book.
There are 8 chapters in total, so the reader will be able to get unique approaches for exploring consciousness within each of the chapters. They each focus on a particular theme.
Okay, wonderful. So we're running out of time, so I just wanted to thank you, Alex, for coming on to Waking Mad, and it's been an absolute pleasure talking with you today.
You too. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you. And thanks for watching Waking Mad. I'm Ben Bruce. It's been a pleasure having you as well.